Antonio. I was a little bitty boy, and down in that town, they had a revival going on. Well, there's a whole lot of dust on the ground. I know what I'm saying. See, at this revival, folks didn't come out to be seen. They didn't come out to show off their clothes. They didn't come out so they could be prettified, but they came out for deliverance. How many witnesses do I have here? But I want you to realize that at this revival, while the dust was on the floor, you get to shout a little bit, and dust will get all over your shoes. Sometimes the Holy Ghost would knock you flat down on the floor. You had dust all over your clothes, but you didn't worry about what folks said. You didn't worry about what it looked like. All you wanted was a breakthrough. Well, I want you to remember that there was a man that was at this revival, and he was one of my uncles. And I can remember just as well when he would stand up at the old revival, take out his false teeth, shake his head, and tell them in that old revival back home. That old revival back home. Oh, how long to be? Memory still live in me. In that old revival back home. In that old revival back home. In that old revival way back home. Oh, how long to be? Memory still live in me. In that old revival back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. In that old revival way back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. In that old revival back home. Let me tell you something. Mothers of the church would get on their knees and pray. You know, God would come in and they would let him have his way. Church got full of the Holy Ghost fire, singing my song and don't cry that old revival back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. In that old revival way back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. In that old revival back home. Let me tell you something. Food will be spread on tables on the ground. Saints will be singing and shouting all around. You know, wasn't much money raised. So many souls got saved in that old revival back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. In that old revival way back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. In that old revival back home. Let me tell you something. Mothers of the church would get on their knees and pray. You know, God would come in and they would let him have his way. Church got full of the Holy Ghost fire, singing my song and don't cry that old revival back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. In that old revival way back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. Back home. In that old revival back home. Let me tell you something. Food will be spread on tables on the ground. Saints will be singing and shouting all around. You know, wasn't much money raised. So many souls got saved.